Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has named 7 impeachment managers for the trial of President Donald Trump in the Senate. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff will lead the prosecution. The House is expected to vote on the managers later today. The trial could begin as soon as this week, although senators are preparing for it to begin next week. Last month, the U.S. House of Representatives charged Trump with abuse of power and obstructing Congress. The Russian government has resigned after President Vladimir Putin announced plans to change the constitution. The president has accepted the resignation and asked the government to stay as caretakers until a new one is formed. He has asked Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev to take up the post of deputy head of the National Security Council. Medvedev said the government was resigning to give President Putin room to carry out changes in the constitution. Putin's 4th term in the office is due to end in 2024, and under the existing constitution, he would not be entitled to another term. In Syria, strikes by the government forces kill at least 9 people and wound 20 others in IDLIB. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the air raids hit a vegetable market in the area. These mark the first raids since a ceasefire agreed with Turkey came into force 2 days ago. IDLIB is the last major rebel-held bastion in Syria after 8 years of war. Earlier, the Syrian military said Israel carried out an aerial attack that damaged a military airport in central Homs province. It said 4 missiles hit the target zone, causing material damage but no casualties. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has dismissed a proposal for a new Trump deal to replace the 2015 nuclear accord. In a televised speech, he told Washington to return to the JCPOA, offering to reverse its withdrawal from the commitments to the pact. Calling the Trump deal strange, Iran's president said U.S. president always breaks his promises. Meanwhile, Rouhani said the Middle East is not safe for the foreign troops and they must leave immediately. He said American forces are specifically prone to being targeted if they refuse to leave. The president said after U.S. forces, European soldiers can be attacked in the near future. Talking at an event in New Delhi, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said U.S. President Donald Trump authorized General Soleimani's killing 7 months ago. Zarif said the killing of Soleimani has caused a major setback in the fight against ISIS. In Iran, President Hassan Rouhani says the country's military should elaborate on how it shot down a passenger plane by mistake last week. Speaking on state television, Rouhani calls on the military to take the next steps of investigation with more coordination. Separately, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif acknowledged that Iranians were lied to for days after the incident. He insisted that he and the president were also kept in the dark. 176 people were killed when Iran's military accidentally shot down a Ukrainian passenger plane in Tehran amid tensions with the U.S. Hours before, Iranian missiles targeted 2 air bases in Iraq housing U.S. forces. The attacks were carried out in response to the U.S. killing of top Iranian general in a strike in Baghdad. Turkey says it's still confident the ceasefire in Libya would hold despite strongman Khalifa Haftar's refusal to sign a permanent truce. Speaking in Ankara, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar says it's too early to say that the ceasefire has fallen apart. He said the work related to the ceasefire continues. Haftar walked away from the talks in Moscow aimed at finalizing a ceasefire brokered by Russia and Turkey, which came into force on Sunday. An international conference on the Libyan conflict is due to be held in Berlin on Sunday. Germany has invited both the sides of the conflict to talks with 11 countries and several international organizations as well. Turkey supports the UN-recognized government of the National Accord based in Tripoli, which has been under attack by Haftar's forces since April. In Iraq, populist Shia leader Muqtada Sadr has called for a 1 million-man march against the presence of U.S. troops. This comes just days after the country's parliament voted to expel foreign troops from Iraq. Sadr said Iraq's territorial integrity is being violated by the occupying forces. The Shia cleric called on Iraqis to unite for peaceful, unified demonstrations to condemn the American presence. He did not specify a date or location for the protests. Meanwhile, the Iraqi military says two Katyusha rockets targeted the Taji military camp north of Baghdad. No casualties were reported and no party has claimed the responsibility. Taji military base hosts a large number of US troops and other foreign forces as well. 38 detainees have been released as part of an agreement between the Yemeni government and the Southern Transitional Council. Saudi Arabia's ambassador to Yemen, Mohammed Al-Jaber, said the prisoner swap was supervised by the Arab coalition. The release of the detainees is part of the Riyadh agreement meant to solve the conflict that broke out between the two sides last summer. Al-Jaber said the release confirms the will to achieve security and peace in Yemen. The second phase of the agreement will include military and security steps to implement the withdrawal beginning on Friday. The Yemeni government and the STC signed the Riyadh agreement in November last year. Oman will back Japan's plan to send a contingent of its self-defense force to the Middle East to guard maritime traffic. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has met Oman's newly appointed Sultan Haytham bin Tariq Al Said in Muscat. Abe offered his condolences on the death of Sultan Qaboos bin Said. The Japanese Foreign Ministry said Abe also met the special representative of Oman's Sultan Asad bin Tariq Al Said. Said said Muscat values Tokyo's efforts and the two sides agreed to work to safeguard shipping. After Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Oman was the final stop in Abe's Middle East tour aimed at diffusing regional tensions. Moving on, Sudanese forces have quelled a revolt by ex-security agents linked to former strongman Omar al-Bashir. The military says it regained the control of intelligence buildings after a 15-hour standoff with the rebels. The security agents surrendered after the negotiations with their leadership. In a televised speech, the Sovereign Council head, Lieutenant General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan, said he will never allow a coup to take place. The violence was the largest confrontation so far between the old guard and supporters of the new administration. Earlier, intelligence service officers loyal to al-Bashir led a mutiny over the financial compensation offered when the unit was disbanded. In Somalia, 13 people have died at internally displaced persons camp in Kada district of capital Mogadishu. Media reports say 3 children are among the dead. They say 3 children have died of hunger while 10 others perished as a result of malnutrition. Human aid reports said people have been forced to eat tree leaves to survive. Adverse climatic conditions such as drought and flooding together with conflict have created a humanitarian crisis. The death toll in flooding, landslides and avalanches caused by heavy rains and snowfall in Pakistan has risen to 103. Officials say 75 died and many others are missing in avalanches in Azad Kashmir's Neelam Valley. They confirmed at least 21 deaths in weather events in Balochistan, where 500 people have been evacuated. Officials say at least 84 houses, 17 shops had been leveled by avalanches, while 94 houses and a mosque partially were damaged in the Neelam Valley. Prime Minister Imran Khan has reached Azad Kashmir, where he was briefed on the damages caused by the natural disasters. The Prime Minister also visited a hospital in Muzaffarabad and inquired after the health of those injured. Elsewhere, major highways, including the Karakoram Highway, have been blocked by heavy snowfall and avalanches. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has left for the US on a 2-day visit. During his trip, he will meet UN officials in New York and the top US leadership in Washington. In a statement, the Foreign Office said Qureshi will discuss the worsening crisis in Indian-occupied Kashmir with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. It said he will meet Secretary of State Mike Pompeo as part of his efforts to reduce tensions between Iran and the US. He will also meet a National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, in Washington. The foreign minister has already visited Iran and Saudi Arabia, where he met the leaders of the two countries in an effort to ease tensions in the region. Indian forces have martyred another youth in occupied Kashmir's Doda district. The troops targeted civilians during a cordon and search operation in the district's Gandhara area. The deceased has been identified as Harun Hamad. Kashmiri media reported Indian forces trapped Hamad and then killed him. The occupying forces have murdered 7 Kashmiris in the month of January. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council will discuss the latest situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir today. Sources say the meeting is being held on China's request. They said the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations will brief the Council on human rights violations in Kashmir. This is the second time the Security Council is taking up the Kashmir issue in less than a year after India stripped the region of its autonomy on 5th of August and imposed a curfew and communications blackout in the valley. Across India, protests and rallies against the controversial citizenship law continue. Activists, students and civil society organizations are holding sit-ins and rallies in New Delhi, Patna, Bengaluru and Assam. In New Delhi's Shaheen Bagh, protesters refused to end the all-women sit-in until the withdrawal of the act. Inspired from Shaheen Bagh, 5,000 women from Patna city in northeastern Bihar state have also launched a sit-in. In southern Karnataka state, a massive rally will be held by rights activists and politicians condemning the law. Meanwhile, people in northeastern state of Assam will protest against the anti-Muslim law through a festival in Bihu city. Over a month of nationwide demonstrations have resulted in the deaths of 27 people. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The International Court of Justice will rule on a plea for emergency measures in a genocide case against Myanmar on 23rd of January. This suit was brought by Gambia in November, alleging a genocide had been carried out against the Rohingya Muslim population. Gambia accused Myanmar of violating the 1948 Genocide Convention in a military campaign, expelling almost 750,000 people from the country. It asked the ICJ to order provisional measures preventing further harm, the first step in a legal case expected to go on for years. Myanmar's leader Aung San Suu Kyi traveled to The Hague last month to defend her country against the charges. She denied genocide took place and said the court has no jurisdiction to hear the case. The US, Japan and South Korea have urged North Korea to refrain from military provocation and continue denuclearization talks. The three-way meeting in East Palo Alto took place after a deadline set by Pyongyang for concessions passed. Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi says economic sanctions on Pyongyang should not be lifted without any progress in negotiations. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper says Washington is working closely with Tokyo and Seoul for North's denuclearization.
It's very important that we remain strong and unified, and that we continue to send the message to North Korea that the best path forward is through a diplomatic solution that results in the denuclearization of North Korea.
Earlier, the U.S. sanctioned 2 North Korean entities for involvement in labor exports in violation of international sanctions. Now, moving on, Taiwan's newly elected president, Tsai Ing-wen, says China needs to show respect to the island. She was re-elected for a second term in a landslide victory on Saturday. In her first interview after winning, Tsai Ing-wen said Taiwan's sovereignty is not in doubt or up for negotiation. She said Taiwan is a successful democracy with a decent economy. Tsai said she is willing to talk to Beijing, but warned that invading Taiwan could be costly for China. Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has slammed UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson for rejecting a new independence referendum for Scotland. Sturgeon has said it is not politically sustainable for a Westminster government to stand in the way of the rights of the people of Scotland. She says Scotland have the right to choose while Tories are blocking democracy. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said a referendum would continue the political stagnation Scotland has seen for the past decade. A formal request was made last month after Sturgeon's SNP won 48 of Scotland's 59 seats in the Westminster election. In France, riot police have fired tear gas to dislodge protesters from blocking a waste incinerating center near Paris. The strikes have entered their 42nd day. Waste collectors and incinerator workers had been blocking the entrance to the plant. Protesters called for the French government to pull plans to overhaul the country's pension system. Workers at several French ports were also blocking sites. Despite the government having made a major concession over the retirement age, pockets of strikers are still resisting across the country. It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. 4 British rowers have won the Atlantic Challenge by rowing across the Atlantic in just over 32 days. Britain's Zoe Palmer, Tom Foley, Hugh Gillam and Max Greet manned the 4 boat named Fortitude 4.
They arrived into Antigua's English harbour late on Monday night. Fortitude 4 began its journey on December 12th from the race's starting point in Canary Island. It took the 4 rowers 32 days, 12 hours and 35 minutes to win what is considered the world's toughest rowing race. Ollie Palmer said he was unable to describe his feelings.
Words won't be able to sum up what we've gone through, how we feel, what we've just experienced, seeing all our friends and family. Yeah, words can't do it justice, but like the memories we've got out there and just now will last for a long time.
Australia's 4 boat called Road Less Travelled is set to finish second, roughly 48 hours behind Fortitude.
How many mosques are there in the world's most populous Muslim-majority country? In 2013, the Indonesian government made a team of 1,000 mosque hunters who visit every corner of the country trying to answer this question. So far, they have documented over 500,000, but the task before them isn't even close to being finished. More in this report.
Counting the exact number of mosques in Indonesia is no small task. 90% of the country's population is Muslim. It is estimated there are 740,000 mosques spread over Indonesia's 17,000 islands.
What we are also gathering is data related to whether a mosque is exposed to radical ideology. We also want to see the geographical distribution of mosques exposed to radicalism. This is helpful to address the radicalism problem in the Indonesian society.
The mosque hunters use drones to take pictures of newly counted mosques and then upload them to an online database. This is a necessary exercise because Indonesia's reputation as a hub of moderate Islam has been tested in recent years. In 2018, Indonesia's intelligence agency found dozens of mosques spreading radical ideology. There have also been terrorist attacks carried out by the local ISIS affiliates.
Data about the number of mosques in Indonesia is questionable because there are a lot of mosques undetected by officials, especially in regions where Islam is a minority.
The mosque hunter hoped to finish the official count by the end of 2020, but new mosques are popping up all the time, making it hard to keep track of them. As such, Indonesian authorities could have a hard time reclaiming the country's religious narrative.
Investment in Britain's tech sector has surged by 44% to a record $13 billion in the past 12 months. The UK accounts for a third of all European funding, exceeding the total in France and Germany combined. The UK government's Digital Economy Council says the country is second only to the US and China in venture capital funding. It said London joined San Francisco's Bay Area, Beijing and New York at the top of the world's best funded locations. Digital Minister Matt Warman said 8 new billion-dollar companies were created last year in the UK. Washington says it will keep in place tariffs on Chinese exports to the U.S. until the completion of a Phase 2 trade deal. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin's statement comes ahead of a Phase 1 trade deal to be signed today. Mnuchin said the trade agreement will be fully enforceable and will include a pledge by China to refrain from currency manipulation. Mnuchin said trade deal documents would be released on 15th of January. President Trump and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He are due to sign a trade agreement at a ceremony at the White House. The deal is expected to include a commitment from China to buy about $200 billion in U.S. goods over 2 years. Ratings agency Moody's has downgraded the credit rating of Eurozone government bonds from stable to negative for 2020. A Moody's report says the downgrade is in response to rising protectionism and geopolitical risks in Euro economies. Moody's senior vice president says the negative outlook reflects states' limited ability to cope with a deteriorating external environment. The report argues high public debt ratios may restrict government's room to cushion a sharp slowdown in growth. The report said European countries such as Belgium, Cyprus and France have unprecedented debt ratios of 100% of GDP. The Wall Street stocks have opened flat ahead of the US and China signing a Phase 1 trade deal. As the investors awaiting the trade deal, the corporate earnings season picked up the steam. The indices of S&P 500, Nasdaq and Dow Jones Industrial Average are trading fractionally higher. Shares of Goldman Sachs dropped in pre-market trading. The stocks of retailer Target Corporation have also slumped, blaming a slowdown in toys and electronic sales. Time to take a look at the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.